Hiding the millennial reign of Christ and how Satan has deceived the nations once again.
Hey, thank you for joining me with Sons of Light in the Abundant Life University. And we're talking about today the timeline between the millennial reign and Satan's short season. And there's a lot of speculation about when all the flipping of history or the revamping of things took place. And I will encourage everyone to go and look into finding sometime in the early to late 1940s, a lot of interviews were done with the remaining people, 98 years old, 97 years old, 100-year-old people who lived during the time called the Wild West. And they will get asked questions by these individuals, what was it like? What did you do during this time period? And today I listened to an older gentleman who was 97 years old at the time, and he was a photographer. And he was sent out across the West to photograph things in Colorado, out towards the plains and these places like that with the old camera equipment. And he said it was quite an arduous journey doing these things because they'd reach a point where going up a mountain or something, they'd have to leave the mules or whatever in their camera equipment. If you could imagine, the camera and all that stuff could weigh up to 100 pounds that they would have to physically carry, because they had the old slides that would go into the box cameras, and they would have to do exposure maybe half an hour. And so he was telling the story about seeing millions of buffaloes and these sorts of things. And it was, and he was telling how the cowboys were just starting to get out to that way. And so what we can gather from this is it was still a rather exploratory time, just in the 1800s, which isn't that long ago. Americans, not the pre-existing people who were here or the Indians, but for white Americans, it was a new thing. It was a discovery point. They were sending out people like this explorer to go out and take photographs of the landscape. They didn't know a whole lot of, the average person didn't know a whole lot of what was going on. And this is supposedly the time that the Mormons went out and with just some wagons and horses and built a castle basically with 2,500 people, all simultaneously while feeding themselves in this remote and desolate place that was very difficult just to survive and build shelter on their own. And they built a magnificent castle, which all of us in this movement and these ideas know is absolutely ridiculous. But the narrative we're looking at today is mud flood. And it appears, even after listening to this gentleman, he had no clue, no mention of it. He was almost 100 years old, lived back in the early 1800s, and he has no mention or no recollection of a mud flood. And of course, you could have things where stuff was staged, maybe secret society people posing as being interviewed and all these sorts of things. But these older people, some of them you can actually see the video of them. They're very old, and I doubt you're going to get a 100-year-old person to stay on track telling a fib or covering up for something, or someone 97 years old. I think they're just going to pretty much tell straightforward what's going on. And it appears, and I would encourage you to go and look into these older folks' interviews from way back then. It appears that if these buildings during a mud flood, if these buildings were sunk or buried, they didn't have any recollection of it in the 1800s. So this timeline theory where people think all this may have happened after the Civil War or during this time, of course, from these type of interviews, we can understand the people were very naive about America, the things going on, cities out in the Midwest, up in the upper north and things. If there was old cities that were left behind and buildings, it seems it would be very easy to fool people, create your own history about the subject matter, because it was a time when people would read very, adventure books about these places, and it was very exciting, and you could tell them whatever you wanted to tell them. But we really don't know. When all this. It appears these buildings, if they were mud flooded, and this gentleman, like a lot of these people who lived 100 years old, getting into the 1940s, when they were interviewed, that these buildings are much older in America, and they were mud flooded, which the mud, you cannot erase, you can't go back. You can't erase the fact that these buildings are buried in mud, and it had to happen at a point in time. So if these buildings were founded in 1845 or whenever they say, and the first 2 floors or the first floor or whatever is buried in mud, there would be people who remembered and wrote about it and talked about it, which can lead us to the conclusion that even in America and a lot of these cities, these buildings are a lot older than we're being told. And they weren't actually built in 18 something. They were built much older than that for them to be buried in mud, because these 100-year-old people never mention any kind of huge catastrophe. That would be, many people would have died. It would have ruined crops and all. It would have been a huge thing to talk about. None of them I've heard interviewed have ever mentioned anything about it. So this is a good point of reference to look into and go from actual people who were there to be able to tell a story, so you can further negotiate or work your way through these timelines. We see even the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. in America. The Capitol seems, yes, you could have a security basement and all these things, but I don't think 1800s and stuff that they were, when they went to build this Capitol building, that they were digging with shovels 4 stories down for that huge of a building, plus a basement or substructure. We have no timeline for when this building would have been built. In order for men with pickaxes and shovels, it would have taken a lifetime just to dig the foundation to the nation's capital. And it doesn't seem that this falls in line with any of the history we've been told. We look at all of these ancient buildings that seem to be buried in this mud flood catastrophe, and a lot of people are hinting at that perhaps this was either Satan's attempt at another reset, some type of destruction, or possibly he was released, and when released, it created this seismic event that created a mud flood, because it doesn't appear for these buildings to have survived and such, that it was a water flood, in other words, like the Great Flood, because the Great Flood would have just devastated even the Tartarian type of buildings, the Millennial rain type of buildings. A cataclysmic flood would have just devastated those buildings. But a seismic vibration of the earth, liquefying the mud. In some of these photos, you can see 100 foot of mud in places, but in most cities, it's a couple stories of mud. So when you look at this, and we're looking at the timeline and trying to figure out when all of this happened, it's probably a good idea to think older, or maybe even pre-1700s. So anyway, today we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, and our sponsor is the Abundant Life University. where you can join. They have a special offer for us, and you can join up there and get all kinds of special books about enhancing your life. The motive behind all of this is that in Satan's short season, they have robbed and stolen from us many of our hopes and dreams, the things we might have done, put us in financial slavery, and done a lot of, through the public schools, have really limited the idea and mindset of all of us. So check them out, the Abundant Life University, in the link below. So as we're looking at these buildings, they are quite fascinating because some of them have an entire city beneath them. Now, some people say, well, the buildup of the sediment over, let's say these buildings are saying, oh, that's a 500-year-old building, you know, and sediment can build up, which it does. If you go and look, like people that go out hunting old World War II relics, tanks, things, they'll go out to look for them, and here's a tank that might have sat on a battlefield or something, and they may find it almost buried up to the turret from sediment and such. But the more likely cause of that is not sediment buildup, but the weight of the tank and the ground being saturated and wet during many years of rains, causing the tank to settle down into the ground, because that's a very heavy object. So, yeah, so we've got these buildings that, and these caves that may be underneath of these buildings. That's another historical item that can't be explained. Underground cities during times when they are said to be very primitive peoples living with primitive tools and such, have cave systems or living systems like termites where 20,000 people could live underground. And the logistics of thinking about how do you get down at the, let's say you're at the bottom level and you got a little apartment down there, how is it being vented? How are you getting food down there and cooking your food and eating? How about the waste removal, showering, or cleaning yourself, using the bathroom? That's 20,000 people is a tremendous amount of waste to take care of. How was that handled in this gigantic underground city? It's as if they didn't have human bodies like us. They actually, you know what I'm saying? They had some kind of different body where they didn't eat. Or it was like the time when the Israelites were in the desert going toward the promised land, and it says that they ate manna, and this manna sustained them, and I don't know that they I think it just absorbed into the body. It was like angel food, and I don't know that they had to use the restroom and stuff, because that's all they ate, and they all remained healthy. It's a very unusual and complex subject, and unless you were there, you don't really know. So they're just interesting subjects to try to wrap your mind around as you're putting all of this together in a biblical timeline, trying to figure these things out as these buried cities under some kind of cataclysm that no one has a historical answer for. And it has, part of this is what has really set everyone off as to the hidden history. There's no way that, look, we have a record of Pompeii, of this 1,000-year-old volcano going off and exploding and wiping out these cities. We have record of that, and the mud flood is a far more cataclysmic event, and yet there's absolutely no record of that. It's very suspicious, because we have, it leads everyone to believe more and more that there's a cover-up, because they are trying to hide the buildings and the age of things, which keeps pushing people further towards a short season for Satan in covering this up, men involved in covering it up, and for an agenda. We believe that the agenda is that these people at the higher levels have contact with fallen angels. Fallen angels walk around on the earth. They've probably been here a very long time. They only have contact with certain people. Perhaps these people involved in these ritualistic things that they do, higher ups, people that sell themselves somehow to these occultic practice, worship them as gods, and they're giving these people access to lots of money to carry out their will, because I don't think these angels, by the laws of the council, the heavenly council, allow them to physically carry out things of harm and do things, but they can get men to do it in their place. And if you get the book we have, Reason to Believe, in the link in the description link, it goes into how these people working for these entities or whatever it might be, how they have hidden this stuff, the tactics. We don't know everything because we don't sit with these evil people, but it's the tactics that are available to be aware and see, that smart people can figure out and go, oh, look, they're using these numeric formulas and these timelines and scales. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, about how the millennial kingdom could have gotten hid, you could check that book out. It's very interesting in increasing your knowledge so you don't keep getting fooled, just like we've all been fooled our whole lives about a lot of subjects. They've literally stolen our dreams in a lot of ways, because we've gone to school and we enter into school and they give us a life path. They give us, they say, oh, you can be a fireman, you can be an accountant, you can be a pilot, you can join them, but they give us all of our options so that our mind doesn't freely think of anything outside of what we may become or could have become, or what we might invent, because we're boxed into this system and we're controlled within it with the lies of the narrative that they give us. They tell us, before we discover it on our own, it's preemptive programming. They tell us what we can live within. And then they tell us about these buildings. So we look at this building and we walk by and we see this much of the a basement, so supposedly windows sticking out of the ground. And they give us an answer for that before we even ask the question, before we even think about it. We just think, oh, that's always been like that. And they give us the answer so that we don't question any further. This is how they've hidden most everything. We look at, in one of the slides, you'll see a picture of it's like a megalithic structure, they say is built or that occurred from a volcano. But then you stick a tree stump right next to it, and then it looks like just a giant tree stump. You're like, wow, that looks identical. And then you read in the book of Enoch where it talks about the angels labored at the lofty trees. That's very interesting. What does it mean by a lofty tree? And why were the angels cutting down these gigantic trees, like the size of a small mountain? How big were these angels? That's really weird too. And what kind of tools were they using? So one of the other things that perplexes all of us, because we know these buildings were built, these castles, megalithic structures, we can't figure out how it happened, is the lack of evidence of the tools and machinery that was used. What moved these things? What lifted them? What hoisted them up on top of the side of a cliff. So I would encourage everyone to begin not only the research into looking, but the most adventurous thing would be to look into the machines. If anybody can find the machines that move this stuff, how they got these big stones up on mountains and things. I don't have an answer for that yet. Because being in construction when I was younger for a long time, I know what heavy stuff is like to try to move with machinery. And these things are way heavier than the stuff we try to move now. So see if you can find anything. Post it in the comments below, some pictures. That would be astronomical to find the tools, the real tools they use to make these things. All right, that's it for today, guys. Thanks for joining me. This is Dan Collier for the Sons of Light. Please check out the Abundant Life University. You will enjoy it. See you guys later. Well, we are thanking our sponsors from Sons of Light and the Abundant Life University, where you can enhance your life right now with fast, effective personal courses, disease-free, healthy eating, eat, play, and live, empowered Christian achievement, get biblical peace of mind through audio teachings, life enhancement courses, wealth building strategies. Your words have power. And get Christian sourced patriot news that you cannot hear on social media. Get the best-selling book and course, Reason to Believe, Hiding the Millennial Kingdom and How Satan is Deceiving the World. How to rewrite your story and live a better life and go beyond boundaries. All aspects are covered in life. These short, easy-to-learn lessons that work. Use at your leisure to enhance your life. They are available 24/7. It's what the church should be teaching you and what you should be learning on the news. Be all God called you to be. Get in for more information in the link in the bio below.